Welcome back to Prison Pen Pals, and in this episode we'll be looking at a letter from Ted Bundy, written to a family friend who in this episode we're gonna call Anne. Now, I'm not making this episode to in some way say that Bundy was misunderstood and that he was in fact a nice guy. In his own words, he said that he was the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you will ever meet. But this video will show you a different side. The Ted, not the Bundy. The side that allowed him to evade justice for so long. The side that convinced the police that he was not their man. I think it's important to remember that these people are all human, and it's this side of Ted Bundy that fooled everyone. Before we start, if you like my videos, please drop this one a like. We failed last time to hit 150 likes in a week, but we weren't far away. So let's try again with this one and break the channel record. Also, if you're new, please hit the subscribe button and consider becoming a channel member for exclusive and live videos. It also gives me more time to make new content. Think of it as buying me a pint. Back to the story. Police in the Pacific Northwest were in panic. During the spring and summer of 1974, women at colleges across Washington and Oregon were disappearing at an alarming rate, and law enforcement had few leads as to who was behind it. In just 6 months, 6 women were abducted. Panic in the area reached fever pitch when Janice Ann Ott and Denise Marie Naslund disappeared in broad daylight from a crowded beach. On the day Ott and Naslund vanished, several other women remembered being approached by a man who had tried and failed to lure them to his car.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if you could help me out.
Help you out with what?
They told authorities about an attractive young man with his arm in a sling, his vehicle a Volkswagen Beetle, and the name he gave them was Ted. But the police were inundated with tips and they dismissed Ted Bundy as a suspect, thinking it unlikely that a clean-cut law student with no adult criminal record could be the perpetrator. He didn't fit the profile. These kind of judgments benefited Ted Bundy many times throughout his murderous career, as one of history's most infamous serial killers, which saw him take at least 30 victims across 7 states in the 1970s.
Plead not guilty right now.
This letter was sent on June 5th, 1980.
I was delighted to read in your last letter that you were planning to visit my mom. I, too, love the quiet UPS campus, especially the library. Sad how I long for the cool, peaceful quiet of that place. I spent much of my freshman year at college exploring the shelves of that library. Of course, back when I was 19, I longed for someplace noisier and more sophisticated. I would gladly spend the rest of my days imprisoned in that library.
Straight away you get this feel for a different side of Bundy. Can you imagine being friends with that family? Seeing what Ted become and being friends with his mother, who sadly and blindly backed her son's innocence until his final hours. Ted Bundy was born in Vermont. Across the country from the Pacific Northwest communities he would one day terrorize. His mother was Eleanor Louise Cowell, and his biological father is unknown. His grandparents, ashamed of their daughter's out-of-wedlock pregnancy, raised him as their own child. For nearly all of his childhood, he believed his mother to be his sister. Is this where the problems started? His grandfather would beat both Ted and his mother, causing her to run away with her son, to live with her cousins. When Bundy was 5 years old, Eleanor met and married hospital cook Johnny Bundy, who formally adopted the young Ted Bundy and gave him his last name.
Carol said you called her last week. Dear, lovely Carol certainly stands up well under the pressure of 1, living in the South, 2, of being my wife, 3, raising Jamie, 4, and making ends meet.
His expertly masked sociopathy allowed him not only to terrorize some 30 women across 7 states, but to earn the affections of and even wed a young divorcee named Carol Ann Boone while he was on trial for the murder of these women.
Carol, do you want to marry me? Yes. And I want to marry you? Yes. And I do want to marry you.
He said you did.
The two managed even to conceive a child while Bundy was locked up and sustained a relationship until divorcing 3 years before his death. While it would appear strange for someone to take so quickly and affectionately to a mass murdering serial killer like Ted Bundy, it's important to keep his sociopathic charm in mind. Bundy kept the women in his life, those he didn't kill, at a distance, as not to blur the lines between his nightly bloodlust and his friendly daytime persona during working hours.
The heat down here is hard on us Northwest transplants. Today it was 95 degrees with humidity at 77%. Please send us some cool, cloudy weather. The closest thing I have to air conditioning is a sink full of water and a washcloth I use to sponge myself down periodically.
Poor Ted. Before we continue, I want to say thank you to Cult Collectibles for donating this letter from Ted Bundy. You can find Cult Collectibles on Instagram, and this guy is selling so many unique items you are not going to find anywhere else. Literally every week there is batches of new insane items. So get yourselves on Instagram and go follow Cult Collectibles.
I cannot begin to imagine the extent of the destruction around West St. Helens. Beautiful forests gone, people unaccounted for, rivers clogged with trees and mud, and old towns on the brink of being abandoned. Miami should be so lucky to be wiped off the map. Old Affy live on the summit of St. Helens than in Miami. Truly a human volcano is Miami.
Ted is referring to the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption, which was the most destructive in US history. 57 people died and thousands of animals were killed, and more than 200 homes were destroyed. He's also pretty spiteful about Miami. This is where his trial was held, so he obviously holds a grudge towards the place. Miami, you human volcano. Before we continue, if you want to write to inmates like I do, then use the service I use. It's called Jmail. It's fast and it's secure, and it means you don't have to use your home address. You can send and receive letters directly through their website, and the main thing that I like is that you can have the physical letters without giving inmates your home address. I'll leave a link to their services in the description below. In 1973, Bundy was accepted into the University of Puget, but after a few months, he stopped attending classes. Then, in January 1974, the disappearances began. Ted Bundy's first known attack was not an actual murder, but instead an assault on an 18-year-old Karen Sparks, a student and dancer at the University of Washington. Bundy broke into her apartment and bludgeoned her unconscious with a metal rod from her bed frame, before sexually assaulting her with the same object. His assault left her in a 10-day coma with permanent disabilities.
I need your advice. What can and should a big 15-year-old bright young man be doing for the summer? Before I had a chance to think about it, the school year is about to end, and I don't believe Jamie has any plans for it. Now, this wouldn't be so bad if we were in Seattle, where he has so many friends and relatives, but in Gainesville, he knows very few people, and there's nothing to do except waste time and get in trouble. He should have something to do this summer which would broaden and develop him both mentally and physically. He's such an eager, dependable, talented young man that I'd hate to see his growth retarded for lack of proper stimulation. What do you suggest? Please do me a favor. Talk to Carol and get her thinking about what Jamie should do for the summer. She's been so busy staying even, she hasn't had time to make summer plans for him.
Isn't it surreal that a man capable of such horrific crimes and probably the most infamous serial killer of all time is concerned about his teenage stepson's summer activities? We all just see Bundy for what he really was these days. But before his arrest, To those he did meet, he appeared to be a charming and caring man. And is this that side of him, or is it all an act? Let me know what you think in the comments. Ted Bundy's next victim, and his first confirmed murder, was Linda Ann Healy. A month after his assault on Karen Sparks, Bundy broke into Healy's apartment in the early morning, knocked her unconscious, then clothed her body and carried her out into his car. She was never to be seen again. But part of her skull was discovered years later at one of the locations where Bundy dumped his bodies. Afterwards, Bundy continued targeting female students in the area. He developed a technique, approaching women while wearing a cast or appearing otherwise disabled, and asking them to help him put something in his car, exactly like Buffalo Bill does in The Silence of the Lambs. He would then bludgeon them unconscious before binding, raping and killing them, dumping their bodies in a remote location in the woods. Bundy would often revisit these sites to have sex with their decaying corpses. In some cases, Bundy would decapitate his victims and keep their skulls in his apartment, sleeping beside his trophies. He said the ultimate possession was, in fact, the taking of a life, and then the physical possession of the remains.
I continue to keep up with the events of the great NW through you. Many and continued thanks for the clippings and inspirational letters. I'd discuss some politics, but it's too hot to work up the kind of sweat I'd break into at the thought of our messy political scene. If I thought Anderson could win, I would support him. An Anderson victory would surely bring down the curtain on the Republican Party as we know it. But if an Anderson candidacy might give the election to Reagan, I would be bound to follow Carter. Weak and sincere as he is. Enough of this. Too many butts in justice these days. All my love, Ted.
All my love, Ted. It's absolutely mad, isn't it? There are a lot of people who believe killers like Ted Bundy have no capacity for love. Now, I'm no expert, but I believe they do. Not all of them, but some of them. A lot of them can be very warm and loving characters, and I don't believe it's all an act. They just have another side to them, which is abnormal and very dangerous. Do you think they have the capacity for more emotions? Let me know what you think in the comments. That's it for this episode of Prison Pen Pals. Until next time, stay sane.